Chapter 3. Through the Desert and Loneliness. After meeting Pride, Much Afraid's poor crooked feet hurt her even more than before, and the journey to the high places was slow and painful. As time went on, she still held on tightly to her two helpers, Sorrow and Suffering, and gradually they began to make better progress. Then, one day the path turned a corner, and to Much Afraid's great surprise, she saw a desert in front of them. As far as the eye could see, there was only bare, sandy land, except for pyramids rising above the sand dunes. Pyramids are blocks that look like enormous triangles that were made out of stone and bricks. Sorrow and Suffering started to take her on a steep path leading down toward the desert, but Much Afraid stopped firmly. "We mustn't go down there. The shepherd has called me to the high places." Still, they showed her that she was to follow them down the steep pathway. Much Afraid looked to the left and right, but there was no other path. All around them were rocky cliffs that were as straight as walls. "I can't go down there," she cried with fear. "He called me up to the high places, not an empty desert." She lifted her voice and called loudly, "Shepherd, come to me. I need you. Come and help." In a moment, he was there, standing right beside her. "Shepherd, I can't understand this. The helpers you gave me are trying to lead me toward that desert, turning right away from the high places. Make a way for us, Shepherd, as you promised." He answered her very gently. "This is the path, Much Afraid, and you are to go down there." "Oh, no," she cried. "You can't mean that. You promised to take me to the high places." "Much Afraid, do you love me enough to trust me? Will you go down there with me, even though the path seems to lead you away from what I have promised?" She sank to her knees at his feet, sobbing as if her heart would break. "I do love you. You know I do. Oh, forgive me. I can't help crying. I will go with you into the wilderness. I will trust you to choose for me what is best." So there, Much Afraid built her first altar, a little pile of broken rocks. With the shepherd standing close beside her, she laid down on the altar her own desires. A little spurt of flame came from somewhere, and then there was nothing but a heap of ashes. That is, at first she thought there was nothing. The shepherd told her to look closer, and there among the ashes was a little stone. "Pick it up and take it with you," said the shepherd, "to remember this altar that you built and all that it stands for." He handed her a little bag. Much Afraid picked up the stone from the ashes, dropped it into the little bag, and put it away carefully. Much to her delighted surprise, the shepherd walked with them down into the desert. He began to sing a song from the good book. And Much Afraid felt her pain begin to melt away. They reached the desert quickly because Much Afraid leaned on the shepherd. By evening, they were at one of the great pyramids. At its base were some little huts where they would spend the night. At sunset, when the sky burned fiery red over the western side of the desert, the shepherd led Much Afraid away from the huts to the foot of the pyramid. "Much Afraid," he said, "all of my servants had to pass through the desert on their way to the high places. Here they have learned many things, which they could never have learned any other place." Suddenly, the desert was full of people, like an endless parade. Some of them Much Afraid knew from reading their stories in the great book. There was Abraham and Sarah, his wife. They had been strangers in a strange land. Then there was Joseph, whose brothers had turned against him. One after another, the crowd of people stretched across the desert. The last one in line held out his hand to her, and Much Afraid joined those faithful servants who had walked through the wilderness. After this, the shepherd took her back to the huts to rest for the night. In the morning, the shepherd called Much Afraid again. He led her to a little door in the wall of the pyramid and took her inside. There was a hallway that led to the center, and from there a spiral staircase went to the floors above. But the shepherd opened another door on the ground floor, and they went into a large room. Piles of grain were everywhere, except in the middle. There in the open space, men were threshing the grain. Much Afraid watched how the grains were first beaten until they crumbled to pieces. Then they were beaten with stones until they became the finest flour. "Did you know that's how flour is made?" Grain is taken from farmers' fields. The tiny kernels are then separated from the husk of leaves that surround them, and then they are ground into powdery flour. The flour is used to make bread to eat. It is the same with my people, the shepherd said gently. They too must be threshed and ground into fine powder so they can become like bread for others. It is a painful process. After this, the shepherd took her back into the central room, and they climbed the spiral staircase. There on the second floor was another small room. In the center was a man making pottery. He was working with soft clay upon a potter's wheel, making a beautiful bowl. As they watched, the shepherd said, I work with my people as though they are clay. I mold and shape them to be like beautiful vessels. I want to do that with you, Much Afraid. I want you to be clay in my hands. Last of all, he took her up the stairway to the highest floor. There they found a room with a furnace in which gold was being refined. The gold was heated until it was very, very hot. Everything inside the gold that was not good floated to the top and was removed. So all that was left was pure gold. As Much Afraid stood fearfully, looking at the fire, the shepherd smiled and said, My rarest jewels and my finest gold are those who have gone through the fire.